and I only remember one. So and also there's membership forms on the center of your tables. The Association on American Indian Affairs is a membership organization, and we would love to have each and every one of you as members. So if you're thinking about it, the form is on the center of your table. Our raffle is still going on. We're not going to draw for these wonderful prizes until the last day of the conference during lunchtime. The table to the left of me over here has all of the raffle items on it, the beautiful items that were donated. So you can come up and check those out. Tickets are available at the registration table, $2 a ticket or $3, $4, $5. And that is the only 3 announcements I remember. That was good. Okay. Shannon says that was good. So let's go ahead and get started. We're incredibly excited about this next panel because our good friends from National NAGPRA are here with us. Melanie O'Brien, who is the National NAGPRA Program Manager, and David Barland-Liles, the Civil Investigation or Civil Penalty Investigator. Sorry, here we are. The National NAGPRA Program has been very busy providing technical assistance and training to Native nations and institutions to support NAGPRA compliance. National NAGPRA will share today some important updates about NAGPRA, civil penalties, potential changes to the regulations, and other information to support repatriation of ancestors and cultural heritage. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our good friends at National NAGPRA, Melanie O'Brien and David Barland-Liles.
Recorded.
Thanks, Colleen. Hello, everyone. Okay, I come from a long line of preachers, so we're going to have to try that again. Hello, everyone. All right, excellent. I feel like I lost about half the room during that break, so I hope I didn't drive anybody away, but hopefully they're just out visiting all the wonderful vendors and will be coming back. It's really great to be here in person with all of you. It's been so nice to see so many faces that I haven't seen for at least 3 years or longer in many cases. As Colleen said, my name is Melanie O'Brien, and I'm the manager of the National NAGPRA Program. Before we get started today with our presentation, both Dave and I would like to provide just a little bit of an introduction to ourselves. I want to say, first of all, it's really great to be back here in Michigan. This photo, which hopefully you recognize as kind of our signature photo from our website, and pretty much anytime I give a presentation, we use this photo, is of course a photo from Michigan. This is a reburial at the Saginaw Chippewa, and from 2013. But we're very, very fortunate to have the photographer give us the permission to use this photo because it's so emblematic of the work that we all do, whether you're in a museum or with a tribe. We're all familiar with this process of walking the ancestors back to a resting place. And that's what this photo is. And it's such a wonderful image to convey our work, I think. And it just happens to be here in Michigan around the same time. You can see the fall colors in this photo as well as on all around us here. It's especially poignant for me whenever I come to Michigan. It's been several years since I've done a presentation or a conference here in Michigan, but it's very meaningful to me. My own ancestors are from Michigan. They arrived in this country from Germany about 165 years ago, and were granted by the U.S. government farmland near Lake Huron. And so my family history really is tied up with Michigan, and I have a pretty well, I guess not as deep as some, but a connection anyway to this place and to my own family history here. So it's always poignant is the best word I can use, because it's not celebratory for me. I fully recognize and appreciate that my ancestors benefit, that I benefit directly from the takings of Native American lands and Native American property 165 years ago. That's how I got to be here today. And I try to center myself on that as much as I can. And it brings me to a connection to this place, but one of restoration and reparations and doing whatever I can to repair that damaged history that my ancestors participated in. Now I'm going to turn it to Dave to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. It's really an honor for me to be here. My name is David Barland-Liles, and I am the first full-time investigator in the history of the National NAGPRA program. I'm in my 11th month of this assignment. Came to the world of NAGPRA through my previous career as a law enforcement officer for the National Park Service. For quite some time, about 13 years, I was a special agent for the National Park Service, investigating felonies within the exterior boundaries of the National Park System. That was a large portion of my 25 years of law enforcement with the National Park Service. Personally come from a preacher background as well. I'm the youngest son of a Lutheran minister and was born in Compton, California, which means I get to say with some nuanced legitimacy, I'm straight out of Compton. Started with the National Park Service in 1989, became a law enforcement officer for the National Park Service, a park ranger in 1997. And then for quite a while, I was a special agent and was assigned a very interesting case involving ancestors that were stolen from a National Park Service museum collection to circumvent the pending provisions of NAGPRA as an act of racism. That act of racism was done by the superintendent of Effigy Mounds National Monument and stole the ancestors, the human remains of 41 ancestors that had been excavated from Effigy Mounds National Monument, which is in northeastern Iowa. They were excavated by National Park Service archaeologists in the 1950s and 60s. And that's how they came to be within that museum collection there. The superintendent became aware that this beautiful law that we're here in a way celebrating today and perpetuating today was about to be enacted, and he stole those ancestors from the museum collection to circumvent the provisions, in essence, ensure that they were not returned to their descendants. He imprisoned those ancestors in his garage in Wisconsin for 21 years. And that crime was enabled to perpetuate by many National Park Service officials that became aware that human remains from Effigy Mounds National Monument had gone missing and nobody knew where they were. Finally, one day, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska got a very strange feeling one morning, in which he proclaimed and quoted as saying, the old ones were talking to me. And he made a phone call to Effigy Mounds National Monument to a superintendent that preceded the other superintendent by essentially two generations of superintendents, and said, I need to look at your NAGPRA inventories. And the superintendent immediately obliged, and that led to the crumbling of a house of cards that was enabled to perpetuate for 21 years. And I happened to have been the special agent that investigated that crime, recovered those ancestors from their imprisonment, imprisoned the perpetrator, the superintendent who did that horrible racist act, and then was with those ancestors when they returned to their journey through the repatriation process at Effigy Mounds National Monument. So somehow that story got to Melanie, and she started to ask me to do investigations for the for allegations of violations of the provisions of NAGPRA done by museums. And I was doing that on a kind of ad hoc basis while I was doing my other law enforcement work for the National Park Service. And through collaboration, we finally realized that the National NAGPRA program needs somebody doing this full time. And that's why I'm here now.
Thanks. And we're very glad to have Dave with us for almost a year and looking forward to more years to come. So we're going to do a little bit of a back and forth today up here. We wanted to talk a little bit about who we are and what it is that we do in the National NAGPRA program. We also wanted to be sure that we highlighted how we can help all of you with your efforts related to repatriation and NAGPRA. And then I wanted to provide you, as those of you who've heard me talk before, a little bit of the statistical data that we have, a little bit of where we're at right now and what the workload is that we have as of right now, really, at the end of our fiscal year, which ended September 30th. So a little bit of an organizational chart, but one that you're a part of. You're at the very top. And this is very serious. I hope that you appreciate by our introductions how seriously Dave and I both take our work, although we are also both pepper humor into our speaking. So, but really, I wanted to kind of clarify for those of you who we are and where we are at, and we're way at the bottom. But there's a layer of administration between us, obviously, but ultimately we work for the people of the United States. We are federal employees. We report to the Secretary of the Interior, who right now is Deb Haaland. Under her are two assistant secretaries that have responsibilities for repatriation and NAGPRA. And then filtering down further through the National Park Service, you get to the National NAGPRA Program, which you can see me, the program manager, and Dave, the civil investigator. You'll notice there's a dotted line from the civil investigator to the assistant secretary, because on civil investigations and civil penalty assessments, we work directly with the assistant secretary on those issues. We work directly with the assistant secretary on a lot of issues. And that's kind of what this slide points out is how the work is divided up among us. So if you look at the Act, NAGPRA, you'll see that there's a lot of points in the law where the Secretary of the Interior has to do things. Well, the Secretary of the Interior doesn't do all those things that Congress said the Secretary will do. So they've been delegated through. The Secretary does retain responsibility for appointments to the NAGPRA Review Committee. Then the top four kind of pieces that are assigned to assistant secretaries, again, at an appointee level within the federal government, are civil penalties, grants, regulations, and then extensions for museums. And then you filter all the way down again to more of the staff support and administrative work that's done in my office. The secretary, as I mentioned, is responsible for appointments to the review committee, as well as renewing the charter for the review committee. For those of you who aren't familiar with the review committee, it's an advisory board made up of 7 members. I wanted to let all of you know that just on Friday, there was one appointment that was made to the NAGPRA Review Committee. I'm pleased to tell you that Armand Menthorn has been reappointed to the NAGPRA Review Committee for a 2-year term. But we still currently have 4 other vacancies on the NAGPRA Review Committee. We're hopeful actually that there will be 3 appointments made this month. So 3 more appointments are very near being announced, and we will then have only 1 vacancy and be ready to move forward with having meetings. There is a vacancy announcement that was published about a week ago. You can find the details on our website, but just so you know, we're looking for another traditional Indian religious leader to be nominated to the NAGPRA Review Committee. Those nominations have to be from Indian tribes or Native Hawaiian organizations or from traditional religious leaders. Those are the bodies that can make nominations to the NAGPRA Review Committee. But we are looking for a traditional Indian religious leader. So if you know someone or part of a tribe that might be ready to make that kind of a nomination to the Secretary of the Interior for an appointment to this body, we would encourage you to do so. Again, there's full details of that on our website. Just wanted to point out, I put a picture of Sonia Adelaide up here on the screen since she's here with us. This is a review committee meeting from 2009, I think. The assistant secretaries, as I mentioned, are responsible for four main pieces of NAGPRA, and those are issuing the regulations, which I'll talk a lot more about in a few minutes, making grants to museums. We announced our grant awards a couple months ago, and another full year of more applications, unfortunately, than we were able to fund, but lots of great NAGPRA work going on through the NAGPRA grant funds. And then, as I mentioned, and Dave will talk a little bit about, the assistant secretaries are responsible for assessing civil penalties. And then you get to the National NAGPRA Program and the National Park Service staff. We have a lot of responsibilities under NAGPRA. Again, mostly administrative staff support responsibilities, but we do our best to carry those out as effectively and as efficiently as we can. And for any of you who've written a NAGPRA notice or been reviewing a NAGPRA notice, you know that those all come through our office, and that's a large part of our work. Certainly also have a lot of work around the grants, administering the grant program, supporting the grant projects as they go through their cycle. And, you know, largely, and what we're really here to do today is to provide assistance to anyone who's working on NAGPRA or NAGPRA issues. That's what we're here for. In fact, it's part of my job description to help you. So please call me so I can help you. To talk just a little bit about the regulations. For those of you who aren't familiar with the federal regulatory process, regulations have the force of law. So they are another piece of the law itself, an extension almost of the act that Congress passed. The regulations explain how to carry out the law. And in order to make a change to these regulations, which were first promulgated in 1995, to make a change, the Assistant Secretary for Interior must first publish a proposed rule in the Federal Register. And that proposed rule is open for a public comment period. After the public comment period, then the Department of the Interior and the Assistant Secretary will consider all of those comments in detail and make any changes to the rule before issuing a final rule, which will then become effective. So it's quite a long process, the federal regulatory process. And many of you may know that the Department of the Interior has been working on revisions to the NAGPRA regulations for some time. About a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, the department conducted tribal consultation on a proposal for the revisions to the regulations. I know that many of you, including the association, were a part of those tribal consultation meetings. And we are still at the point of working towards a publication of a proposed rule. So that hasn't happened yet, but we're hopeful that it's going to happen soon. The department remains committed. The secretary, as well as the assistant secretaries, are committed to making an effective change to how NAGPRA has been working for the last 30 years and to resolve some of the issues that have been identified. And in particular, some of the issues that the revisions to the regulations are trying to address are really trying to rewrite the entire regulatory process into a step-by-step process. So it's clear how you get from the very beginning to repatriation. And repatriation is the end point. It is the purpose of these regulations. There's also a few additional requirements that would be a part of the proposed rule, and that would be including some timelines for responding to requests for repatriation and some new documentation that would conclude the repatriation process in a more clear way. Most significantly, I think for many of you in this audience, the revisions to these regulations would replace the term culturally unidentifiable, but keep the same method for repatriation of those ancestors and objects based on geographic location or Aboriginal land. There would be a requirement in the revised regulations for museums and federal agencies to publish notices of inventory completion. It's currently not a requirement that happen in any time frame. The revisions to the regulations would require that within 2 years and 6 months. And then, as many in Michigan are aware, as many across the country are aware, the current regulations do not require repatriation of associated funerary objects with human remains that are culturally unidentifiable. We are proposing to change that and to require repatriation of all associated funerary objects. So that's a little bit of what we're looking at in terms of changes to the regulations. Of course, there'll be more information, including a complete draft once that is published as proposed. I would like to, and I meant to do this at the beginning, like encourage all of you to think of questions you might have for us. As we conclude our formal presentation, we'd like to really turn this over to all of you to ask us questions. So keep in mind, if any of that raised a question for you, write it down and ask us later. And I'm going to turn to Dave to talk about some of our objectives for his enforcement efforts.
Most of what I've discovered as I joined the National NAGPRA program and recognize that this is an excellent opportunity for change and challenge of the program itself, is seeking ways to ensure that the allegation process itself is not an inhibitor to repatriation. The proposed regulations offered by the National NAGPRA program are one very important way to try to ensure that that we remove a potential inhibitor to repatriation. What I sense is, should there be a need to enter into an inherent adversarial process by writing an allegation of a museum that has been determined by any person to have failed to comply with the provision of NAGPRA, it would be terrible if the actual process of making that allegation was inhibiting repatriation down the road. So a couple of things that I would like to do and that we are proposing. One is to create an allegation guide that is very simple to follow, place it on our National NAGPRA website that any person can look at and very clearly see how to make a written allegation of any museum that has some evidence that they have failed to comply with provision of NAGPRA. Looking at past practices from the National NAGPRA program kind of made me feel like it was overly officious, and that in and of itself may have been burdensome to anybody that wished to make an allegation. So we are working on that allegation guide as we speak, and hope to have that up on the website soon to assist anybody that wishes to make a written allegation.
Dave, it's behind you.
Oh, thank you. The regulations, the procedures, standard operating procedures associated with the investigative process itself really needed updating within the National NAGPRA program. I mentioned that I'm the first full-time investigator in the National NAGPRA program. So we are working, Melanie and I are working with the solicitor's office to make sure that the operating procedures for investigations themselves are up to date. They were last done in 2004, maybe. So I've been working hard to update those and ensure that from this time on, there's a very solid path of the investigation itself that is agreed upon with the solicitor's office and can lead to findings of substantiations or unsubstantiated claims that will serve the Assistant Secretary best. In addition, make sure I get this right. Over my law enforcement career, especially with the types of cases that I investigated, I built a network of subject matter expertise. And it's very clear to me that that network needs to continue to expand. One of the things that surprised me in the 11 months that I've been doing this job is just how many criminal referrals I'm making in the National NAGPRA program. Allegations that are coming into the National NAGPRA program that are actually criminal in nature, not civil in nature. And due to just past investigations that I've done and kind of, maybe the cachet that comes with being one of the few federal investigators that has done those kinds of investigations, it seems that I've had better success than the National NAGPRA program has in the past in making referrals to, say, the FBI art crime team, to the whatever Office of Inspector General that may be associated with, should it be indeed a federal agency that is not complying with a provision of NAGPRA or is doing something that's kind of NAGPRA adjacent, a employee that's doing some type of criminal activity that is connected to, has a nexus to an ancestor, objects, sacred objects, funerary objects, items of cultural patrimony, and assisting those entities with building their own subject matter expertise and hopefully take these matters quite seriously. The Effigy Mounds National Monument criminal investigation, which, by the way, was United States versus Thomas A. Munson, and that was resolved in 2016 on July 8th, 2016, through a plea agreement process that ended in a sentencing. That particular case brought forth many very important lessons that for a while, maybe I was the only one that really understood. And I continue to try to perpetuate those lessons to my colleagues in the investigative world, both criminal and civil. One of the important lessons of that, it likely was the first federal criminal investigation in the history of the United States that was consulted with tribes, meaning I used a rule of federal criminal procedure called Rule 6E, which enables the prosecution to share secret, or what's referred to as grand jury material, with specific entities should the sharing of that material assist with prosecution. One of the entities that's specifically mentioned in that federal rule of criminal procedure is tribes. So when I opened the criminal investigation into the Effigy Mounds matter, it happened to be during government to government consultation with tribes that Effigy Mounds was doing and invited me to attend. It just so happened that a piece of information was presented to me and to all the tribal representatives. There's about 20 nations that affiliate themselves with the place we now call Effigy Mounds National Monument. And that one piece of information was enough to open that criminal investigation at that very moment. There were no U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, or prosecutors in the room. So on their behalf, as the case agent, I created the opportunity for tribes to monitor a federal criminal investigation. And apparently that had never been done before. And, that's what happens when you hire somebody straight out of Compton, I guess, because I didn't realize that I was doing something novel, but I knew I was doing something right. And the 20 nations assembled 4 representatives to monitor that federal criminal investigation. And that actually evolved into participating and assisting with that criminal investigation due to the need for tribal knowledge to enhance that criminal investigation, and it did every step of the way. Following that, and recovering the ancestors that were imprisoned in Thomas Munson's garage, I presented that case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution, and they immediately accepted it. Then learned that 20 sovereign nations knew everything I knew. And that was the first time that the U.S. Attorney's Office likely entered into consultation with tribes on a criminal matter. We were talking about Holly Cusack-McVeigh earlier in the Don Miller case, which has a very similar kind of pattern of development. And it seems to me that that pattern of development should be perpetuated within the federal criminal justice system. And I don't see why it can't be perpetuated within the federal civil investigative world on NAGPRA matters. So my anticipation is for, and there's many of you in the room that have heard from me already on civil investigations that I'm doing right now. And I hope to convey with as much transparency and honesty as possible, which is all of it, what I'm finding in these investigations, in hopes that that knowledge can create the path that we can walk together to resolve these matters as we share information to enhance the findings of the investigation. These same types of transparency and honesty also are conveyed in another area of expertise that the National NAGPRA Program is probably not too well known for, and that is the tremendous amount of civilians who are reaching out to the NAGPRA program after they discover, maybe through an inheritance or an estate transfer or something like that, that lo and behold, one of their relatives has been in possession of an ancestor or some type of object that it needs to be repatriated. And we're constantly assisting citizens with understanding the provenance and provenience of their ancestors, their relatives' collections that they are now in control of, and guiding them toward private repatriations to the appropriate nations or nation. So this is where this expertise will hopefully continue. And even today in the hallway, I learned that there's still some resistance out there amongst some in the federal law enforcement world about this concept of tribal monitoring of federal criminal investigations. And I would just want to convey to all of you that knowledge is power. And now you know it's been done before, and it's been done exceptionally effectively. Not only did the U.S. Attorney's Office consult with tribes, they even consulted with tribes on what a plea agreement should look like in this matter. As I mentioned, I found those ancestors imprisoned in Thomas Munson's garage. Actually, Silver Tongue deviled his wife into believing that I was telling her the truth, and her husband of 50 years was not, and she provided consent for me to go into that garage and had him sign the consent form as well. So he didn't want to go to trial because he knew he was guilty. He wanted to enter into a plea agreement. This was likely the first time that tribes helped the U.S. Attorney's Office develop what not only a plea agreement should look like, what this person should be sentenced to, but even what crime should he plead guilty to as well, which was a fascinating process, likely has never been done before. And all of these things are foundational to my understanding of how we all can innovate in the field of not only criminal, but civil proceedings associated with NAGPRA. And the FBI Art Crime Team is constantly consulting with me on 18 U.S.C. 1170, the trafficking criminal provision of NAGPRA, and wondering if they can do the same. And as you might have guessed, the FBI is extremely good at doing repatriations of all federal agencies. It's the FBI. You might have guessed that the National Park Service has struggled with repatriations, and this particular story about what happened at effigy mounds is a window into why that's been problematic in the past. So the last thing I do is work with federal agencies to stand by those who are advocates and allies of repatriation, those employees who are calling out in the dark, just like the ancestors did, the old ones, to the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, to knock down these little houses of cards that remain in the federal government. And I assist them and stand next to them and advocate for them and provide them with what's worked in the past so that they can assist their own entities with seeing through the National NAGPRA Program and the statutes process. I think I have one more. Yeah. Through all of these processes, the ultimate beneficiary, strangely, is me. The National NAGPRA Program Investigative Bureau is an office of one. And through all of this networking, through all this allyship, through all of this transparency and honesty, through all of this government to government trust building, the investigative bureau of the National NAGPRA Program just becomes stronger. And that means we are removing barriers to future repatriations. And if our proposed rules go through, that can only mean many, many more future repatriations. And indeed, the National NAGPRA Program, through its understanding of what these proposed rules may mean, is one of the reasons why they made the wise choice to create a full-time National NAGPRA Program investigator position.
Well, it's like David seen my slides. He led right into how we can help. And I talk to a lot of museums and I tell them to always start with what their goal is. So I wanted to start with what our goal is, and our goal is repatriation. We want to get everyone to yes when it comes to repatriations. And we want everyone to be able to go home. They may not go home, that's dependent on tribal nations and their process for reclaiming ancestors. But our goal is to make everyone able to go home when there is a request for them. So I wanted to be very clear about what our goals are here. Before I tell you how we can help you achieve our goals and your goals, if they align. And that is, we're available to share information between any parties We not too long ago had information shared with us from a tribal representative who wanted that information shared with other tribes that might have an interest in a particular collection. And so we were able to do that. We're able to answer questions and provide guidance to anyone who asks of it. We're also happy to help you with research efforts. If that is research on inventories or summaries or collections and what's been done in the past. Or if that's questions about who receives federal funding and who is required to comply with NAGPRA. Those are the kinds of research topics that we're very good at. But we need your help because we need you to ask us. For us to be able to take those steps and to look into inventories and summaries and to research federal funding status, we need somebody to ask us. So please ask us. And all you have to do is ask. I put up here on the screen both our main phone number, which you can call and leave a message because we are sort of all in a semi-telework status. Please leave a message and we will get back to you. Or you can text me. My cell phone's right there. Or you can email us and we will get back to you. It may take us a couple of days, but we will get back to you. A lot of people are surprised when I respond to their email message to the NAGPRA info box, but it comes to my phone. I see them all. I respond to some and some I pass on to other staff to respond to, but just ask. I wanted to highlight a little bit of the work that you all have done. And we're getting ready to move to our questions. So feel free to start moving your way to microphones if you have questions. And those of you on Zoom, start raising your hands or typing in the chat. I'd initially labeled this what we have done, but as I sat here listening, especially to the two presentations this morning from our friends in Alaska and the Pokagon Band, I changed that to what you have done because this is the work that all of you have done over the last 32 years to bring ancestors home. And you can see we're almost at the halfway mark. The blue, if you can't quite read it, and I understand that, the blue are those Native American human remains that have completed the regulatory process, meaning they've been published in a notice. And the orange are those that are still waiting for consultation and notification before they can go home. These numbers are new numbers. We just kind of ran our numbers at the end of the fiscal year. So we're getting ready to publish these on our data visualization site, as well as in our program report. So these will be publicly available soon, but the total number of ancestors that have been reported under NAGPRA as being held in museum or federal agency collections as of this year is 208,000 ancestors. And the way it breaks down is that about 100,000 of those ancestors have completed their regulatory journey and can complete their journey home, while about 108,000 are still waiting in museum collections to come home. Just another representation of the same information. I'm pleased to see the movement. We're each year making progress, slow but steady progress to this being a fully blue circle. In looking over the years, this is a chart that, again, you cannot read, but hopefully you can see at least the gradual change. This starts in 2010 and goes to 2022, and it represents the total number of ancestors that have completed the process. So it has been steady progress from 2010, where only 39,000 ancestors had completed the process, to this year, where 100,000 ancestors have completed the process. So this is work that you have done. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of work that we need to do together. And this is where I will remind you again that we are here to help you do this work in any way that we can. And this represents again, you can't read it, but you can see a slight decline. These are the ancestors that are still in museum collections, waiting consultation and notification under the process before they can return home. Something that I've been sharing over the last several years that I find to be fascinating, and this is what I'm going to leave up on the screen while we do questions, is this map of the United States that shows where the ancestors were removed. And you can see Illinois jumps right out at you there. 15,000 ancestors were removed from the state of Illinois and are still in museum collections. The second there is the 12,000 in California that were removed from California. And then third on the list here is Ohio. I will say that for those of you who've seen this chart before, there's a big change here. And the big change over the last year is that over 10,000 ancestors were repatriated by the University of Alabama to the southeastern tribes, collectively to the Muskogean speaking tribes. This was a very long journey for the tribes, really an effort, an enormous effort by the tribes to reclaim their ancestors. But that has drastically changed my map because Alabama used to be quite up there near as much as California and Illinois. But that has been drastically reduced by this one notice that sent 10,000 ancestors home. It's the largest notice we've ever published. It has been again, just an enormous effort on the part of the tribes in this instance to compel the museum to return their ancestors, and they were successful. I'll go back to the map while we do questions, but I did want to provide you with what is, as of this year, the top 10 collections, the top 10 museums that hold Native American human remains that are still waiting to go home. So with that, we will turn to questions. I think actually I wanted to say one other thing, and that was, could you put this back, the big shot again? I think several people were still taking photos. There we go. Thanks. During the last presentation, one of the elders was very poignantly remarked that he hoped it will get better. And I guess I'm standing here today committing to you that I will make it better as much as I can, as much as we can. We are committed to making it better. Appreciate that there are limits to what we can do, but that's our goal. Our hope is that it will get better. So do we have anybody who'd like to come forward and ask us questions? I see we have some Zoom questions.
Okay, so before we begin that, I just wanted to mention earlier this year, there was a Proud Boy that came to our powwow and jumped into the circle and knocked over me and our lead veteran who was carrying the flag and threw it into the fire. And he had an AR-15 and a handgun, and the local police did not care. And I got in touch with the FBI, and I know that we have a long and sordid history with federal agencies. But my uncle Michael, hi Mikey, sorry. My uncle Michael and I can tell you the FBI were incredible with us and have remained in touch with us. And I know it doesn't directly relate to this, but the one thing that Agent Cribbs did tell me when he was doing the investigation is, we want to do better. I want to be better. So I wanted to just kind of say that. Okay, so Randy has a question. If an allegation guide is put in place, and if we make an allegation and that allegation doesn't fall within the parameters of the guide, is there an allegation?
There's an allegation. If it's not an allegation of a failure to follow the provisions of NAGPRA, then it is not a NAGPRA allegation. However, that doesn't mean that I won't refer that allegation to whatever entity has jurisdiction and authority over the elements that the allegation have within it. So that's pretty common too. It's not uncommon for the office at all. And just because there isn't an allegation guide at the moment doesn't mean you can't write an allegation. You do it anytime. But it's very common for someone to write what they think is an allegation of a failure to comply with the provisions of NAGPRA that is actually an allegation of some type of criminal activity, not civil activity. And often I will work with a referring agency to provide them with this allegation of the criminal activity so that it can be investigated. And we'll decide whether a civil investigation can happen in parallel, if there is indeed a allegation that is a NAGPRA allegation, if this is an intertwined investigation, or should the criminal investigation need to be resolved first before the civil allegation can be investigated. And that's a very common thing that I do all the time. So if it isn't NAGPRA at all, but there is some type of criminal activity, I will refer it to the proper entity. If it is adjacent or it is indeed both, then I will work with that agency to figure out how to properly investigate that matter. And it's not particularly uncommon for me to suspend the civil investigation, waiting for the criminal investigation to resolve.
Okay, so I think this might be a follow-up of that. The next part was a few barriers that tribes face are the definitions that are put in place, and how do we get past those types of barriers?
If the definitions we're talking about are the definitions of failure to comply, which are specific in the existing regulations, one way we hope to resolve that is by removing them from the regulations. So removing those limited ways that a museum can fail to comply. If the limitations that the person is asking about are the definitions within NAGPRA itself of sacred item, sacred object, object of cultural patrimony, or funerary object, I have to say that there is room in those definitions to cover a lot of objects that maybe haven't traditionally been viewed as NAGPRA objects. But there are plenty of examples of ways that tribes in particular are pushing the envelope when it comes to those definitions. So if there is an object that a museum has refused to repatriate, let us know. And an investigation is what can identify whether it meets that definition or not. But just as I mentioned before about asking us for help, we can't investigate unless we have an allegation. So tell us, let us know, let us help you, let us look into it. If we can find a failure to comply, we will do our level best to find the information to show whether there's a failure to comply or not. But we need you to start that process. So again, I think the bottom line is just ask.
And
along those lines, I wanted to mention, if you are hesitant to stand up in this room and ask your question, please know that Dave and I are here all week. And there are rooms in the back that we'd be happy to take the time and sit with you and talk to you one-on-one. We might wear our masks while we do so, but we're happy to make some time to speak with anybody who doesn't feel comfortable in this space asking their question.
Yeah, I find these investigations also, first, I really appreciate the question. I appreciate all of them, but these investigations tend to unveil a lot of truth. And even on the FG Mounds matter, recovering those ancestors, bringing them home, consulting so openly, so transparently, so vulnerably. And I would say that all of our vulnerability was rewarded. Helped us, the National Park Service, realize that effigy mounds is in possession of sacred objects and items of cultural patrimony that they didn't really recognize as such until that transparency, that honesty revealed itself, because the item itself, from a colonial point of view, didn't seem to be sacred or patrimonial. So every one of these investigations has a very cold case kind of atmosphere to it. I certainly need to go back to November 16th, 1990 with each one of these investigations, and often find I have to go back much, much farther, like to the origination of the museum itself, or the provenience of the collection that they are in control of. And what that means is I'm shining a light into a lot of places that haven't been looked at in a very long time. That reveals a lot of facts. And even if, say, a written allegation turns out to be unsubstantiated for some reason, that doesn't mean that there's some kind of inherent failure in the allegation. Absolutely not. The investigation, even if it turned out to be unsubstantiated, is going to reveal a lot of facts that have been obfuscated for quite some time, and knowledge is power, and the entities or people or a person making that allegation now has access to it through the investigation.
Do we have somebody in the room?
Honey, Veronica Passfield from Bay Mills Indian Community. We're working, looking at collections right now with several different museums. I wondered if, and if you've already done this, I apologize, I got in a little late, but if you could speak a little bit to the fact that NAGPRA is primarily human rights legislation, and that an expansive, tribally leaning interpretation for objects that are, let's say, or spirit items that are NAGPRA eligible is appropriate in the context of a human rights law. Because I feel like sometimes we have to understand our work in an expansive way and feel confident in our power and the appropriateness of our framing of how this law is used for us. You go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Veronica. It's good to see you. So many of you are aware that California, the state of California passed its own law related to repatriation. And in that law, the state of California requires deference to Indian tribes on repatriation, identification of objects, treatment of objects. There's a requirement for deference to tribal wishes and tribal definitions under California state law when it comes to repatriation. I had the great opportunity to speak at a conference, a workshop for California tribes and museums about a month ago, and was asked where that if that conflicts with federal NAGPRA, and the answer is absolutely not. There's no reason why deference to Indian tribes or Native Hawaiian organizations on the identifications of objects or the repatriation of objects or on cultural affiliation is prohibited under NAGPRA. It is not prohibited under NAGPRA. There's no prohibition there from taking what tribes tell you and using that to make your decision as a museum. I would say that, California law requires it. And so therefore it within the state of California, deference to tribes is a requirement. It's not currently a requirement under federal NAGPRA, but I do hope that one day we will see stronger deference in the regulatory process to definitions by tribes.
We have another, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even go ahead
Please,
in
go ahead.
person.
Good afternoon. My name is Roseanne Downs, and I'm a member of the Fallon-Paiute Shoshone tribe. And our tribe worked 20 years to repatriate Spirit Cave. I now work for the University of Nevada, Reno as their NAGPRA liaison. And it's a lot different to be on the other side of the table. But the way I run my job is the way I run it as a tribal member, that all of the ancestors, no matter where they came from, don't belong where they're at. And so as I look at the map that you showed up there, especially Nevada of 293, it brings to question on the fact that I don't believe that the inventories are complete and the checks and balances of the agencies to follow through to make sure that they are complete. I've seen the UC Berkeley collection, and I know that it's a lot larger than that. I believe that when you go for a financial audit, the auditors come and there are a team of 5, and we have one investigator for an entire country. And so as I sit there and I look, going back through with Spirit Cave and using the process, and it's really disheartening when I hear the call for members to serve on the review committee. And I know the reason why they're not putting in there. The review committee is non-binding. Our tribe went to the review committee numerous times. We had a hearing. BLM didn't show up. We won our case there, 7-1, 6-1. And go back to the agency and they say, well, it's just advisory. It's not advisory. Those recommendations need to be binding. If those inventories are not complete, there needs to be punishment for that. Because if we don't do a complete financial audit, we are fined. These are ancestors, old people. A burial put in the ground today is just as sacred as one 10,000 years ago. And as I sit there and I listen and I hear we'll do the best that we can, or, use this process. The process doesn't work, because after 30 years, there should be a lot more people, ancestors home, because when our old people and those warriors fought for NAGPRA, they fought for all of them to go home. But for my state, with 293 and 28 federally recognized tribes, that tells me that those inventories are not complete. And so my question is, how do we make it, or how does your department make consequences and or audits with more teeth in it? Because right now, it doesn't seem that we're being truthful and honest with the tribes.
Thank you. Well, I think when I'm asked if there are more ancestors than even what's in my numbers, in my statistics, I have to say probably. I only know what's been reported by museums and federal agencies, and it is on federal agencies and museums to report all of their Native American ancestors. Whether they've done that or not is a question. I can tell you that every year the total number increases. That suggests that every year additional ancestors are reported. How do we solve this problem? How do we fix what happened with the Nevada tribes and Spirit Cave and the lack of follow through immediately? But I am glad to say ultimately Spirit Cave was resolved and repatriated. That change, as well as an increase in the teeth of NAGPRA, really has to come from Congress. Unfortunately, the Department of the Interior, the Secretary of the Interior, even if she wanted to make the review committee findings compulsory, she could not. It would violate the law as Congress wrote it. And that's where those kinds of changes need to come through tribal legislative advocacy, through AAIA's legislative advocacy, other ways to explain to Congress where there are issues with NAGPRA and with the NAGPRA process and how that can be changed. And this is that awkward moment where I have to tell you, after I've committed to do as much as I can, that there are limits to what we can do, unfortunately. And within the scope of the law, we do feel like there are ways to change this, to have an impact. But there are certainly things that are outside of the scope of the law.
Okay, I don't think I see anybody up. Yeah, I do. I have a couple of them. So I have, someone is asking about they wanted to know if they were correct in reading that there are at least 700 pending allegations within the new NAGPRA investigatory enforcement position. Is that accurate?
No.
Okay. So there's that question. And then someone wanted, some of these are easy. Is the map with a legend posted on the website?
Not yet, but it will be. Those are the hot off the press numbers, and I was furiously creating those in the back while I was listening this morning. So they're not up yet, but they will be in the next week or so.
Sounds good. And I have Cordelia Nelson is asking a really good question that I think a lot of people wonder about. What can I do as a lower level employee of an organization that is hesitant to repatriate? I often feel like I am dismissed by higher ups at jobs because I'm younger or it's assumed by them that there's nothing to be done. And I do have more questions, so congratulations.
What you can do, my first recommendation to you is to join the NAGPRA community of practice, where you can find other people who are similarly situated and you can get support, even just commiseration with somebody else who is equally frustrated with their position. I think that there are lots of examples of what you can do if you are in an institution and you're frustrated by the efforts for repatriation. And that is to make your frustration known, but make it known in a thoughtful way. Use resources from the National NAGPRA Program website to explain why your institution needs to take a different approach. Call Dave, have a little chat about what the civil penalty possibilities are against your institution if they are not compliant, if they don't take action. Network with tribal representatives and encourage your institution to understand that this repatriation is the first step, sometimes the necessary step to a better relationship with tribes who can have an even greater impact on your institution, but you can't get there until you start repatriation work.
So the next question is actually another really good and pertinent one. Can you explain the difference between a civil and criminal allegation?
Yeah, the elements of the allegation. So the civil penalties provisions of NAGPRA are extremely well defined and live within the Title 25 of the United States Code. When I see allegations that are criminal, that's going to live in another United States Code, normally 18, Title 18 of the United States Code. So the activities that are alleged to have been done by an institution or an individual have elements, the things they did are demonstrated within the elements of an actual criminal code of law. They've done activity that they can go to prison for. In the civil matters, the activity, especially in the NAGPRA world, we're actually looking at institutions, the museums, not individuals. So when the allegations come in, I'm actually looking at the activity that they're describing and seeing if they match a criminal code of the United States statute or a state statute for that matter, or if they match the civil penalties provision of NAGPRA. And each allegation can have and will have different pathways toward resolution, which is why I'm so careful to parse out the activity that's described in the allegation and make determinations if they're actually describing criminal activity or civil activity.
And yes, I have another question. Does anyone else want to stand and ask one? Okay, so can David give the number of allegations of failure to comply that have not been either affirmed nor cleared?
No.
I will say in response to that we are, as a part of our annual reporting this year, we are looking to report more on civil penalty allegations and have more information available in our annual reporting around that issue. I think Shannon wanted to.
She thinks I don't have questions because I work here. Okay. Hello. Oh, this is not cool. Okay. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about consultation because I really would like to work on stronger advocacy about what consultation means under NAGPRA. So just for a little context, I've been in rooms and conversations where museums have admitted that when they've submitted their inventories to NAGPRA, they did no consultation. Though there was geographic and other information available, for whatever reason, maybe it was the secretary's deadline and she wouldn't or he wouldn't have extended it, but they didn't consult. But that documentation is sent to NAGPRA and was basically ended up as CUI, right? So our large, the huge culturally unidentifiable inventory has seemed to have grown. It's now starting to come down and we're so grateful for that. But why isn't consultation really seen as a requirement of that inventory? Does the National NAGPRA program have anything that they can compare it to really understand whether consultation happened for an inventory? Perhaps maybe a confirmation from the tribes that they were supposed to consult with to demonstrate that that inventory is in fact complete and done in accordance with NAGPRA. And if that isn't in accordance with NAGPRA, then how can we improve what museums and institutions understand as consultation so that it's truly tribal directed and tribal defined? Thanks.
Sure. I think Dave probably has some perspective on this as he has investigated questions of whether consultation occurred in 1990, between 1990 and 1995. But I guess I want to stop a minute, and I hope Shannon will forgive me for not answering her question directly, but instead suggesting a different solution. We could spend time going back and looking at what museums did or did not do between 1990 and 1995. Or we could reset the requirement. We could say with these revised regulations to museums that still hold collections, you must consult. And they must do so, and then they must move forward to providing an update to their inventory and to publishing their notice of inventory completion. So that where consultation may not have occurred, it's going to occur. The problem I see with where we're at right now, especially with the 108,000 ancestors that are still in collections, is that consultation can go on for years and years on those collections. And that means they're not available for tribes to request and to bring home until that consultation is complete. And what I don't want to see happen is that museums delay a process by using consultation as the justification for that. So I think that to answer your question, could we go back and look? Yeah, we could, or we could change the requirements and move forward from where we are now, which is what I'm interested in doing.
Yes. So let me ask it a little differently because you didn't answer my question. What is consultation? What does the National NAGPRA program define as consultation under NAGPRA? Or what is the accepted practice, industry practice under NAGPRA that has been developed that may not be quite right? And by the way, these inventories have been occurring well past 1995. So it's not that pre-regulation inventories that were created. They extended into the 2000s. So, and it could be a practice that continues. We don't know unless tribes are defining it for themselves. And so I guess that's really where I want to go. If we're going forward, I don't want to look back either. I want us to go forward, but we have to understand what consultation means as defined by the tribes that are being consulted. And I want to understand if the act and its regs equate to that or not. And we need to do something to change it.
Well, so right now, neither the act nor the regulations define consultation. There is no definition in NAGPRA or the regulations for consultation. We are working on proposing a definition for consultation. There was one included in the draft proposal that we presented for tribal consultation last summer. So definitely a part of this revision is to create a definition for consultation. Almost similar to my comment about Cal NAGPRA and its requirement for deference. There's no reason why a tribe couldn't provide its definition for consultation and its protocol for consultation to a museum. And that would not conflict with NAGPRA because there's no definition there for what consultation is. A tribe could assert what consultation is to a museum. Now, will the museum accept that or have to accept that? Maybe not, but why not start there? Why not start with what the tribe says is consultation? You know, another good example of this that I learned in California is one tribal representative, she has a monthly consultation call. So if a museum comes and wants to consult with her tribe, they join her call. As opposed to what we're used to seeing, which is the other way around, that a museum has its consultation or it sets out its calendar for consultation over multiple years and tribes have to fall in line. She has taken a different approach. So there's no prohibition on that. There's no reason a tribe couldn't make those kinds of assertions. There's no reason that other tribes couldn't follow the example that's been so successful here in Michigan with NAGPRA in dictating the process from the tribe's point of view. Now, it's not always been so smooth, and I think we'll hear certainly in a session tomorrow about some of the really huge hurdles that tribes in Michigan have had to overcome. But there's still a lot of room for how this process works. And I think that there's a lot of room for tribes to assert how that process will work.
We have another question, and in the meantime, I was wondering if you guys could think about examples, because people are still getting a little bit confused about the difference between civil and criminal. But in the meantime, Randy would like to ask a question, and Randy, I'm going to ask you to unmute, please.
Thank you. I'm Randy Tebow. I represent Pueblo de San Ildefonso and work with NAGPRA quite a bit. Been a NAGPRA consultant, developed NAGPRA policy for our programs and various programs that I worked for. One thing that I keep hearing is museums. What about these federal agencies? Army Corps of Engineers got warehouses of all these stuffs. You know, they have to coordinate with different agencies, different schools, different, archaeological places to house their items that they have that aren't going as smooth. I've had issues in South Dakota working on NAGPRA issues with the Army Corps of Engineers that, people said, this is where this item come from. They were indicted. This is where we got this. And they showed them directly on a map where those things came from. But where are those items now? They're sitting in Sarks in South Dakota. So, you keep saying, let's work with these museums that have that. Well, what about the federal agencies that are housing all these NAGPRA things? How are we going to go back about getting those things back? Because they're the ones that, I know the government isn't supposed to be in the business of housing or collecting, ancestors and things like that, right? So, does it just go for museums that we're talking about, or these federal agencies as well? And, I have developed, consultation policy, and I do, and it's been adopted by the tribes but, does that mean that federal agency has to go by my consultation policy or no? Because consultation to me is not sending me a letter saying, hey, review this, or hey, provide us comment. And the Army Corps of Engineers is great about that. Here's a letter, provide your comment. You don't provide comment within so many days, we're done. So I know I said a lot there, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, regarding these federal agencies and returning these things back and making it streamlined.
Thank you for your question. Yes, federal agencies must comply with NAGPRA, just like museums must comply. There is a difference in the enforcement options for a federal agency. Only a museum could receive a civil penalty under NAGPRA. A federal agency would be subject to a court action through what's called the Administrative Procedures Act, and it's a different process. That doesn't mean, though, that federal agencies are off the hook or that they don't have to do this work. They do. If they have collections, no matter where they're located, that federal agency has responsibilities to repatriate them. We know that this is an issue. We know that many federal agencies have a hard time getting information about their collections that are held by museums. So we hope that we can improve that by requiring museums to inform federal agencies that they have collections that belong to the federal agency. But you're absolutely right that the federal agency still has to do the work. They still have to complete the process. They have to conduct that consultation. And my only recommendation to you is if you are not getting responses from that federal agency, then go up the chain, see who you can contact, see if you have a way of working with your congressional representatives to make it clear that the federal government is not doing what it should be doing in terms of repatriation. Because we absolutely know that while it's a smaller number, it is still a number of ancestors that are held by federal agencies, including the National Park Service, that still need to be repatriated.
And we just had we have a
Yep.
walker up to the microphoner.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question about that? That's a little bit tangential, but I think kind of related. Around the time NAGPRA was being passed, archaeological programs, CRM programs associated with universities or museums or government agencies were in decline, and private industry was, its private CRM industry was growing. Many private CRM firms have their own collections and are still unable to get Section 106 projects. So has there been any conversation about modifying the NAGPRA regulations to be able to cover that gray area of outside firms that work for government agencies to do these projects and may well, most probably do have collections of ancestral remains and funerary objects in storage facilities?
Thanks for your question. I would say it's not a gray area. It's very clear. It's whoever owned the land that those ancestors were removed from, that CRM firm was working on, that's who has responsibilities under NAGPRA. And that may be ultimately the state. This is where there are 51 different answers to your question, which may seem like a gray area, but it's not. And the question, the first place to ask your question is the State Historic Preservation Office. What does state law require happens to those collections, whether they're from private land or state land? There is a requirement under your state law. Just like we saw in the video, in the short clip we saw, right? Somebody finds something eroding from their property, the first step is to call law enforcement. Absolutely. But if law enforcement does not have jurisdiction, if it's not a recent criminal action, or if this comes out of a project that was known to be archaeological, then there are other laws that come into play here that need to be invoked so you can figure out who has to repatriate. That's the bottom line. Those collections that CRM firms hold, they have to be repatriated. It's just a question of who has to do the repatriation, and that's knowable. We can help you as much as we can, looking at what the state law requires, connecting with the correct SHPO's office, if that's the correct location, to try to identify who does have those NAGPRA responsibilities. But there shouldn't be any collections really that are outside of the scope of NAGPRA unless they are truly held in private hands.
Okay, we have another walker.
And we're out of time, I will say. So I would we'll take this last question here and then I would very much like to be able to respond to those that we have on Zoom as well, but I can do that later. Okay,
Hi, Lisa Woodward, archivist with Pechanga Band in Southern California. What about the CARES Act funding and institutions that took COVID relief funds that weren't subject to NAGPRA? Are they now subject under NAGPRA? Or I guess private companies that took funding to keep their employees, like archaeological firms?
sure.
Have you dealt with any of that yet?
So we haven't had a specific case. So there's no, as the lawyers would say, case law on this question. But we do have a very clear definition in the act itself on what constitutes receipt of federal funds. And in the regulations, that is currently defined to include a loan, which a lot of the CARES Act and COVID relief funds were done through loans. Now, there's a lot of questions around this, and it comes down to the specifics of each case. Which program was it? Which fund source was it? How were the federal funds distributed? There are conditions here. However, that doesn't stop anybody from asking the question about whether a museum, whether anyone now has received federal funds for purposes of NAGPRA. And we can help with that. We would be happy to assist you with that. A lot of times when we're asked those questions, a simple search on the internet will result in an answer to the question. We've had instances where we go to the museum's website and it says at the bottom, funded by this federal agency. And we're like, well, I think we kind of wrapped that one up. The CARES Act might be a little bit more complicated, but not, again, not unknowable. We are the federal government. We like to keep paper. So we can look into sources of federal fundings if you ask us. I think that's, I'm getting the hook.
I left my cell phone up here.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay.
Well, give it up for Melanie and David. And just as a reminder, there are meeting rooms in the back, and just as Melanie mentioned earlier, if anybody would like to meet with either one of them, that they would be happy to do so. Please reach out to them and sign yourself up on the sheet in front of the door if you'd like to use any of those meeting spaces.
Just a note though, don't sign up on a meeting space without telling us first, because we
That
won't
part.
necessarily be showing up unless we know we're supposed to. That
Yes.
happened once, just wanted to.
Thank you. Reminder for your daily surveys on the table. If you're joining us here in person, you can choose to fill it out with a pen and return it to the registration table at the front, or you can use the QR code from your cell phone or device. If you're joining us from Zoom, this is important to all you Zoomers. There is a very last session of the day titled Daily Survey, October 11th, 2022. Please join that session. And once you hop into that session, you'll see a link for the daily survey. Please be sure that you fill that out. We would appreciate it. A reminder that the raffle is still going on. You can get tickets at the front registration table, and the items are here on the table to the left. Thank you again for buying all of our t-shirts. We appreciate your support. And if you didn't get one and you would like one, please use your program. There's a whole page, I think, dedicated to the t-shirt, and you can follow the link. We have a bit of a break right now, but at 7 p.m. we have a tribal only event tonight. And so please be sure that if you are joining that event, that you come back here. I think we're holding it in this space. And or possibly in one of the smaller meeting rooms, but please just come back to this space and we'll direct you. And I once again forgot my note sheet, so I'm not sure if I have I can't hear you, Shannon. Oh, yes, tomorrow. We have a conference going on tomorrow. Did you guys know that? tomorrow will be day 2, so we'll start again in that good way with sunrise ceremony at 7 a.m. I'm sure that you all received a message and have found out that we have moved sunrise ceremony inside just simply because because it is a little chilly outside. Michigan weather just has a funny way of doing that to us. So we have sunrise ceremony in the farthest conference room in the back. It's called, there's a sign on the door from the main hallway that says entry B. So if you'd like to join us in the morning for sunrise ceremony, entry B from the main hallway, and it'll be this last conference room in the back. Breakfast is at 7. See, maybe Shannon should have done this. Breakfast is at 7:30. We like that. So join us for food. And once again, shout out to Four Winds Casino staff for the amazing cooks and the food they've been providing us all day. We definitely appreciate that. So we'll start here at 7:30 to 8:45 for breakfast. And then we begin with our keynote speaker, Dr. Jennifer Raff, at 8:45 a.m. tomorrow morning here in this room. All right, I got the good sign now. I'm good. So I just want to thank you all for sharing space today and being here, bringing your hearts and minds to these conversations, and for trusting us to take care of you while you're here. And once again, thank you to the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi for this beautiful facility and all of the support. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning. And once again, well, I was going to say, oh, there's a word in my language, Anishinaabe, and we use this word when we say wingezen, and it just simply means take care. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.